Financial leadership is changing. CFOs no longer record history. They make history. This podcast will help you become a better leader, strategic thinker, and digital visionary. Welcome to Secrets of Rockstar CFOs, the ultimate podcast for chief financial officers. Follow along as Jack McCullough engages in exciting chats with accomplished CFOs, learning how they overcame obstacles and positioned their companies for the future. Here's your host, Jack McCullough.
Hello, Rockstars, and welcome to another episode of the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs. I'm your host, Jack McCullough. Before we start out, a big shout out to our sponsors, Plantful and Travel Bank. We have a great guest today, so let's rock. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs. I'm your host, Jack McCullough, and you can follow us online at rockstarcfos.com. Great guest today. I'm pleased to welcome Michael Burdick, who is the founder and CFO of Paro.ai. Paro is an AI-powered marketplace that delivers finance and accounting solutions to businesses through a combination of expert financial talent, data-driven tools, and guiding insights. Michael, welcome to the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, Jack.
Thanks. And, I know the description's accurate, even though on the initial cut, I mangled the pronunciation. But I know it's accurate because I took it right off of the website. But it's perhaps not yet a household name. So maybe you can share a little bit about the company.
Yeah, so happy to do that. We're a two-sided marketplace for finance accounting folks to basically work on their own terms. That's really our guiding principle and why I started the company. I came from a Deloitte background, and so it's really like a rigid firm structure. I would say going into that, I was probably a typical millennial, someone who wanted to work on projects that I was excited about working on and sort of express my talents, my career trajectory in a way that I wanted to. But the reality of a firm is it's rigid, it's structured, you can't veer off course. And so that's difficult in today's day and age where people want to work on their own terms, have that flexibility, freedom, autonomy to express their talents in their own ways. And that's why I started Paro, is so that you can do that and have your cake and eat it too, if you will.
And interesting, when we spoke about a week ago, you referred to it as the Uber of financial expertise. A rather intriguing line. You probably can't use it in your advertising, unfortunately, but can you share a little bit of what you meant by that?
Yeah, I would say almost like Uber Black for finance and accounting professionals, because really what we focus on is quality, right? We want sort of the folks that are the best and brightest to go out there and work on their own terms. Sort of, you can work fractionally, sort of on a project basis. You could be part-time. You could build your own firm through us. That's on the supply side, sort of the experts. But if you think about that, that's the highest quality folks out there. And that's why I say Uber Black, right? And companies, SMBs, mid-market, enterprise companies want to work with the best and brightest, sort of the McKinseys of the world, if you will, but don't want to have to pay an arm and a leg to work with that quality, right? And so that's why we exist. It's sort of Uber Black for finance accounting professionals.
Yeah, that's very intriguing. So, and I want to return to it, but I always like to explore the early years of our guests and their career paths. And yours is particularly interesting because you started with Deloitte, and I started with the firm that's now KPMG, and yet you're obviously a very entrepreneurial person. So we'll explore that a little bit. But to begin with, where did you grow up?
That's a good question, actually. And in today's digital nomad world, I'm sort of a physical nomad. My dad was a career, he worked at Caterpillar for 30 years, so a career single company journeyman. And whenever promotions occurred, we moved to the next location. So I lived in 8 or 9 different states in the US, and then lived in Switzerland for 4 years. So I've just been moved all over the place growing up, but I'm sort of, I'd say, Midwesterner at heart with some Southern flair.
Okay, that's interesting. So if someone forced you to say, "Where's my hometown?" referring to your childhood hometown, you wouldn't be able to come up with one, would you? So
I would probably say Houston.
Houston. Oh, how about that? I thought for sure you're going to say the Midwest, but yeah, I grew up mine's pretty simple. I grew up in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. I'm a quirky New Englander, and that's all there is to that. But so how do you think, like, growing up and moving around, especially living in a foreign country at a relatively young age, which not a lot of Americans experience, how does that influence your philosophy on running a business today, if at all?
Well, I think a lot. And also, one thing that I did growing up is played competitive sports quite a bit. So that's also shaped how I think about running a business and how I think about teamwork and, sort of just playing sports, I think has left a lasting imprint on how I view building companies. So it's sort of like the mix of living overseas and moving around all the time. I didn't like my parents so much for that, right? It's sort of like every time I started to build close friends, they would rip me out and move me to the next place. And so, as an adolescent, didn't necessarily like my parents so much at that point in time, right? But in hindsight, I think that made me into who I am. And so I'm very grateful and thankful for that experience and sort of for how my parents helped me, shape my worldviews and sort of how I think about adversity, because I do think, if you're in a cushy environment your entire life and are not challenged and pushed outside your comfort zone, you're not going to realize the best possible outcome for yourself. And so I think sports and moving around really left a lasting imprint on who I am today.
Do you still do sports today?
I wish. I was playing soccer quite a bit, like in a men's league, every like Tuesday night until COVID, and then got out of the groove and just haven't picked it back up. So soccer was definitely my sport all the way through college. I actually walked on the undergrad soccer team in college. So that was a really cool experience. Definitely spent a lot of time riding the bench. But that was a career highlight.
Yeah. Hey, you still did it. There's very few people who make a team at the collegiate level. So good for you. So I want to get back. So what was your first job? And I'm talking about maybe when you were a teenager or college student, not your first job after graduating.
My first job was detasseling, corn detasseling. So when I lived in the Midwest, making minimum wage, you actually walk up and down the corn aisles and you pull the tassels off and drop them on the ground. So I think it's so that the corn does not pollinate itself, or it's to help it in pollination. I'm not sure which one it is. But that was my first job. And so, there's sort of this trajectory that I had over my life, and definitely I'm fortunate for that, of doing atypical and non-conformist type jobs. And I think moving around all the time actually had a massive impact on that as well.
Yeah, I had a bingo card of things you might say, and corn detasseler didn't make the list. So we'll have to put that in the subject of the podcast, from corn detasseler to CFO. So, no, that's great. And you studied business in undergrad?
I went to Duke undergrad, which is, they don't have like a business program. So it was economics and psychology is what I studied. Also got my MBA from Kellogg. So probably that's where I studied some business, I guess, the business psychology component. But definitely got my early business acumen and experience from Deloitte, which was a cool experience.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're studying psychology, because when I think back, like the things that you need as a leader, probably studying psychology is more valuable than what I learned studying accounting when I was an undergraduate. So, but did you sort of always have this entrepreneurial bent to you, even as not always, but even as a late teen, early 20s, or did it come to you from the Deloitte experience?
No, it was always growing up. I just had a massive competitive streak and liked to build my own things. And so some of that was hands-on building, sort of, built a bug catcher when I was in the Midwest, and, just had like an entrepreneurial itch. Whenever the middle school sales programs would come around, Christmas time, you go around knocking everybody's doors and you sell Christmas wrapping paper or whatever trinkets you can. I set the highest sales record a couple of years in a row. And it's just like that's the entrepreneurial spirit that I had. It's just wanting to build and try new things, and just was curious mindset. And so it's definitely over my life something that I had an itch and a yearning for. And I think Deloitte was sort of a wake up call that this is not aligned with what I want to achieve and be, in future years of my career.
Yeah, although that serves an invaluable purpose, right? Every experience is a good experience, even if you don't like it in the moment, because it helps you learn, even if you're just sort of eliminating things that you don't want to do. So,
Yeah.
which let's face it, not many of us know exactly what we want to do when we're 21, 22 years old and finishing school. So,
I mean, if I could add to that real quick, I think
please.
we as humans learn the most from our failures and sort of things that we don't succeed on versus the things we do succeed in. And so I actually believe in, taking small risks and failing often, because that's how you learn. That's how you grow in a much faster trajectory. And so, I think trying new things and failing is the way to go.
Yeah. You know who Bill Walton is?
Yeah.
The basketball player, a little bit of a quirky personality, but a brilliant mind. And he said he learned more from his failures and disgraces than he ever did from any awards he won. So I think he's probably being a little bit hard on himself to call whatever he went through disgraces. But yeah, you do learn a lot from failure. Every entrepreneur I know has shared that with me. So you left Deloitte and learned a ton. You're working with some of the smartest people in the game. But what inspired you to start Paro? That you took from Deloitte, and maybe you saw a hole in the marketplace and that wasn't being filled?
Yeah, I mean, look, like I'm eternally grateful for Deloitte, and I think it shaped sort of my business, my business fundamentals and foundational layer. How a firm model works is you go work on a project or you work on a client need based upon what pops up, right? As an entry level analyst, right? You don't really have a say in what that project is. And so at Deloitte, a lot of it was just building my entry level business professional skill set. What was the spark? I was on multiple different projects, highs and lows, things that I was excited about, things that I wasn't. And I, more often than not, was working on projects that were not exactly, aligned with what I wanted to do longer term. And I ended up on one project in middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, and definitely don't mean any offense to anyone who is from middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. It was in Amish country at a regional hospital system. I just didn't want to be there, right?
Yeah.
And I was going to the project site, and one morning I saw a horse-drawn buggy pull through a McDonald's drive-through, and I think it was such a surreal moment, as like a wake-up call, like shaking me, like, what are you doing? This isn't what you wanted going into Deloitte. And so I kind of set out to create what it is that in reality I wanted to do, which was to have the autonomy, freedom, sort of access to work on my own terms and chart that trajectory for myself. And so that's why I created Paro.
Yeah, no, it sounds like a great natural thing. And getting back to a little about Deloitte, every successful person I met, be they an entrepreneur, an executive, or investor, they had important mentors along the way. And sometimes the mentors don't even know that they serve that role in the person's career development. But did you have any important mentors at Deloitte, or maybe just in other aspects of life, that sort of formed your vision that now directs this company?
Yeah, there is one person in particular that I looked up to quite a bit growing up, and I think it was primarily from living overseas and built a close relationship with him. Ed Rapp, he was the CFO of Caterpillar, and amazing guy. Just really looked up to how he balanced work and life, and just was on an incredible trajectory. Sort of embodied the morals and the values that I kind of wanted to look up to and realize myself. And so that he definitely mentored me, and sort of, he didn't know it probably, but I definitely gave him a call from time to time just to pick his brain and think about, hey, how would you pursue or think about this specific situation? Or and so amazing guy.
That it sure sounds like. I actually think he spoke at an event that I organized years ago. I know we've had the CFO of Caterpillar. I'm not 100% sure if it was him or not. It might have been a different CFO, but the name's familiar, so it probably was. So that's great. And, one thing that I want to talk to you about, because it's, first of all, I'm legally required to ask you the following question as a podcast host, but also you're genuinely an expert on the topic. And it's technology generally, but AI in particular. And CFOs have a different, set of challenges than other C-suite executives because, their instincts and candidly their responsibility are about data privacy, cybersecurity, just keeping things confidential. And at the same time, this is the ultimate game-changing technology, probably, certainly within my career. I suspect you're a few years younger than me, or at least a few years younger than I am. So, perhaps something else will come along. And for me, it's this and the internet. But how should CFOs be thinking about AI in a way that's, pragmatic and allays their concerns about cyber and data privacy?
That is a phenomenal question. And if you don't mind me taking a step back, I think one thing we should probably discuss is just my views on, office of the CFO and being a CFO and sort of how that transformation has occurred over the past 5 to 10 years. Because I think layering AI on top of that is a really interesting combination, sort of a force multiplier. So, there's sort of like the traditional CFO mindset, and then there's sort of the modern CFO, if you will. Traditional, I think everyone can conjure up that imagery of just being in charge of governance and financial statements, sort of like the foundational components, having the right controls in place, very just like back office oriented. And I think the modern day CFO is more commercial and growth oriented, sort of has much more become the right hand man or woman to the CEO. And that means commercial and growth means you need to have your hand across all components of the business and interacting with all, leaders and growth advocates. And it's not just a siloed mentality, which was more the traditional mindset. And so I think modern, it's sort of like the yes and. The yes and is sort of you need to be able to do all the governance, the controls, the regulatory components and privacy, and have a commercial and growth aspect to how you approach your day to day. And so I think using that as sort of the aperture and lens, it's layering AI on top of that is where I think it becomes really interesting and sort of also probably a little bit overwhelming too, right? Because I think a lot of CFOs or folks within the CFO org probably are still, making that transition from traditional CFO mindset to, commercial or modern CFO. And so then you layer on top of that the AI component, and it's a lot, right? That's a lot of change to navigate and manage all at once. And so it can be overwhelming, and I acknowledge that. And so I think because of what AI is going to do to transform the CFO org, it's important that everyone within the finance office understand, and deal with and use AI. And so, what that means is baby steps, like as opposed to this just being overwhelming and what is all this, Gen AI or next gen stuff that's being adopted, just, baby steps. You can download ChatGPT and just ask it questions. Now you have to watch out with feeding it company data or whatever, right? But just dabble, right? Just try, and you'll learn. And I think that's part of the growth mindset. And tying this back to my earlier days of my career, it's fail, right? Just try new things and fail, and that's how you'll learn. So don't let this be overwhelming in a way that you're not putting yourself out there and trying new things.
No, that makes a whole lot of sense. And, it is a time where, modern technologies are just changing at an incredible pace. There's somebody recently told me Moore's law is actually outdated, that he was right for a long time, but the pace of change is actually faster than even he predicted, which, I'm old enough to remember that was like a radical idea that he came up with, that the technology would change that quickly. And by and large, he's been right. And if anything, now he's understating the rate of change. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I think, to go down a nerdy rabbit hole a little bit, there are questions right now around scaling laws for LLMs and sort of Gen AI. Can you, sort of ChatGPT 1 to 2 to 3, the leap was extraordinary. So the question is that going to continue to scale? And I would say probably not, right? Because there's only a finite amount of information on the web, for example. And compute, you can increase that, and what GPUs can do only so much. You can buy thousands of H100 clusters, and the output is not going to be multiplied as much as the input, because the input's finite. And I think this is a very important thing, which is the data quality, and sort of what you access and what you have at your fingertips is so important, right? Your company's proprietary information is what's going to be a differentiator for you. It's not just using LLMs and Gen AI. It is turning your unique data into a strategic advantage, using AI.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. It's the strategic advantage, and the role has changed so much. And you sort of referenced, what I sometimes call the old school CFOs, and that's what I was. I haven't been a CFO now for over a decade, and I was probably pretty good at my job, but the job today is just so different. It's maybe even the people who are successful in CFO jobs from who got them in the year 2000. It might be a different group of people getting CFO jobs today than that coterie. I mean, I think we would have learned and adapted, but maybe they just would have been different people rising to the top in the profession.
I actually think it's a really interesting observation, because the sort of finance leadership suite is a very atypical trajectory. I think it still is a world that values certificates and sort of prior experience and logos, and it remains sort of conservative in that regard and in that nature. And so my view on the future is that's going to change, right? But right now it still is the case that I think a lot of the folks that occupy CFO roles are more from the typical background, right? But they've figured out how to adapt into the modern day CFO growth mindset role.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I want to chat with you about your own role, because I think your official title, and do correct me if I'm wrong, besides being founder, is Chief Strategy Officer and Interim CFO. And, my sense from talking to you a couple of weeks ago and again today is, probably the long-term play is Chief Strategy Officer for you. But let's chat a little about the crossover between the two roles and how you interact with the other executive leaders within your company.
Absolutely. Well, I think they're just titles. So I think what's more important is what you do and the impact you make. And I've always been somebody who values numbers and sees sort of like a spreadsheet or, a trend line, and wants to figure out, what does that mean? How do we double down on this? What are we saying no to? What are we leaning into? How do we turn this into a strategic advantage overall? And using numbers as sort of the way to craft that narrative, right? Or the lens to view that through. And so I think there's a lot of overlap between looking at the future through the lens of numbers, right? If you think about a CFO role, maybe half of it is accounting oriented, half of it is finance oriented. And, if I had to overly simplify, the accounting side is more historical and looking backwards, and the finance side is more, looking forward. And so I like the looking forward and finance and growth aspect of that, which I think has a lot of overlap with the Chief Strategy Officer type role, right? Sure. So that's where the Venn diagram overlaps, if you will. In terms of interacting and working across the org, I don't know if there's any pattern recognition there. It's in today's world, you have to be collaborative and work as a team. And I think even from my days playing on sports teams and being super competitive, I view building a company and running a company as being, a team sport. And so you have to you're only as good as your weakest link is one of the ways to look at it. And you have to work together to be a force multiplier for each other to deliver the most optimal outcome. And so, that's sort of like probably cemented in me from the playing sports days.
That makes a lot of sense. And one thing I want to chat with you, because, your background in sports probably influences your leadership strategy. And I know from our prior conversation, you really take a lot of pride in the team that you've put together over at Paro. So what is your leadership philosophy and your talent development philosophy within the company? And, what can people maybe learn from you? Because I'll tell you, when I talk to my members, what their 5 biggest challenges are, just about all of them will put, talent management in some form, whether it be retention, retaining, developing, whatever, in it. So what's your philosophy, and what can our listeners take away from that?
It's a good question. I think let's put this into 2 buckets. One is sort of hiring the best talent. What do I look for? And then the second is sort of managing and developing the best talent. In terms of hiring, probably going to be beat a dead horse here, but I look for people that have played sports, right? And I like prior athletes. I like folks that are competitive. I also look for in their, if you look at their resume or their LinkedIn profile, I look for their rate of growth and their trajectory. I don't necessarily look at titles or logos or brands, right? So I want somebody who is a rising star. I want to invest behind their trajectory, not necessarily, hire somebody who is the SVP of blah, blah, blah at Amazon, right? I'm not looking for logos and brand sort of splash. I'm looking for the substance behind the title, right? What have you done, and what have you achieved, and what do you want to accomplish in the future? I want to get to know you. So that's how I look at hiring. In terms of developing and investing behind people, I think the CEO of NVIDIA, everybody's probably heard this guy talk, Eric Jensen. One of the things that he said to, I think, a group of Stanford graduate students is that he hopes that everyone experiences great suffering in their life. And I thought that was like one of the most interesting and shocking things that, especially to a group of, Stanford graduate school students, to say to them. And it's because you learn the most from your when your back is pinned up against the wall, or you're in a corner, or you're working, 100 plus hours a week, and you fail. You learn the most from that, right? When you are overexerted, you are sort of, pushed outside your comfort zone. You're not probably enjoying it, right? But that's when you learn the most. And so, as a leader or as a mentor, I do that almost deliberately, because even though the folks that work for me may not like me, I hope that they learn the most from working with me. And so that's something that I really optimize for and focus on, because being liked is not aligned with me helping them achieve, spread their wings and be the most that they possibly can be, and achieve the most in their career, because that's what gives me the most joy.
I'm sure that your employees like you. You're a pretty likable fellow from what I can see. So, yeah. So I want to ask a little about your company. Again, getting back to, and what do you see as some of the challenges and opportunities facing the company in the next few years? Obviously, an ever-changing marketplace, which for a guy like you is fun and exciting, but it does create some challenges to stay on top of that. So, can you sort of bring out the crystal ball and let us know what direction you're taking, Paro?
Yeah, well, I think there's sort of endogenous factors, things that you can influence and control. There are exogenous factors, things that are external that you can't necessarily control. We're a venture-backed startup, and so one of the exogenous factors that really influenced us quite a bit was the venture markets and 2021, 2022, where mostly 2021, where venture was, multiples were insane. People were just plowing money into venture hand over fist, and the mindset was just grow, 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 which is kind of at odds with how I think we think about building a company, which is, build a good company, grow, be efficient, be thoughtful about how you deploy capital. But whenever you have exogenous factors that are just plowing money into startups, that can definitely influence even the most sort of disciplined people, right, or operators. And I'd say it influenced us for sure. And so that was an interesting factor over the past several years. And how we think about building a company moving forward, it's aligned with everything that we've been doing for the past 6-7 years, and building our vision and realizing our truest and fullest potential. We're integrating and have integrated AI into everything we do. It's really about enabling finance accounting professionals to work on their own terms and have all the tools and capabilities to feel comfortable doing that, right? Because it's honestly, frankly, terrifying and scary for a CPA to go from knowing their career trajectory, working at the Deloittes of the world, but wanting to work on their own terms, and then saying, I'm going to do that and jump off the cliff, right? Because, by the way, you don't have, in the freelance economy, you don't have a consistent sort of safety net or, known trajectory. And so that's why we exist, is to make it so that people can freelance or work on their own terms and feel comfortable doing that.
That makes a lot of sense. And also, getting back to sort of your clients, what are some of the biggest challenges that your clients are facing, and how does Paro help them out with those things? I'm sure a lot of it is in the digital area, but I looked at your website. You do have a pretty impressive wide range of services.
Yeah. So our clients, they spend a lot of money on finance and accounting services. Think about it as external finance accounting spend with the CPA firm, or using a finance accounting consultant, if you will. And the issue with the accounting world, at least how I see it, is you're paying for the brand as opposed to the quality behind the brand. And so, what we're doing is sort of democratizing access to the highest quality folks on demand, so that you get a McKinsey quality person at the exact price that you're willing to pay and at the quality you're looking for. So if you're a $250 million CPG company and you have a specific tech stack, you're on a specific accounting software, you probably don't want someone who's right out of undergrad, who's a generalist and not going to add value. You want to work with somebody who's done it before and knows your company and knows your space and can solve your specific problem. But you also don't want to pay an arm and a leg doing that, right? So that's where Paro comes in, is our matchmaking algorithms tee up the best fit experts for a given specific problem or pain point for the clients. So the value creation is pretty exorbitant and incredible in that way. And so we view, if we continue to build the flywheel with the supply side and have the best experts on our platform, the best thing we can do for our clients is have those folks on our platform.
That makes a lot of sense. So, well, I want to change gears a little bit here again. And one of the things I'm hoping to accomplish with this podcast, amongst many, is to sort of change the perception that people have of CFOs. So in that spirit, I want to ask, do you have like a fun fact, or maybe an unusual hobby, or even like a favorite go-to joke that you use that you'd like to share with our listeners? So far, nobody's taken me up with the go-to joke. So
that's a tough one. I definitely have a dry sense of humor, and probably extraordinarily sarcastic, but I don't have like a joke, that I'll tell at a bar. In terms of fun fact, I don't know if I can beat the first job as detasseling. But
that's up there.
I worked at a lemonade stand at a state fair. I worked for an oil rig servicing company at one point. Let's see what else. I've been to Mongolia. Is an interesting location.
Oh, yeah.
I've been to. I've also scuba dived in Palau, which is in the middle of nowhere in the Pacific. A lot of this is just, from living overseas, just had the travel itch and bug, and so I just like doing stuff like that.
No, that's fantastic. So, but which leads me to another question, and it's an important thing: work-life balance. And how do you do it as best you can? It's critical, but sometimes for entrepreneurial types like yourself, it's kind of fictional too. But what's any suggestions you can make to people to achieve it within the reality that they're facing?
Probably going to say something that I shouldn't, but I think work-life balance is sort of like an illusion. I don't do it well. Let's just start with that, right? Mm-hmm. But I try to prioritize and shuffle things around depending on what I have going on in my life. If there's some important kids event that I need to be at, that becomes a priority, right? However, sometimes I can't prioritize my family, and so it's all about prioritizing and saying explicitly what those priorities are. So I think it's more about work-life integration almost. And so making sure that people are aware of what priorities you have going on, as opposed to work-life balance, because I definitely don't do the balancing part well.
We all do the best we can do. So, well, that's a great answer. And I may need to cut that out of my standard list of questions, because I'm asking a lot of people like you that I'm just asking them for advice on something that they themselves don't think they necessarily do very well. So, but it's still a critical thing. But so I'd like to conclude with any advice you might have for the next generation of CFOs.
Yeah, I think lean into AI, because it is going to be extraordinarily disruptive, and focus on baby steps. As I previously mentioned, in terms of like the next generation of CFO leaders, or next crop, and I probably recommend something atypical, which is go get your CPA, and study accounting in undergrad. And then focus on finance in your business career. And the reason I say that is because I think the foundational aspects and elements, sort of the building blocks of finance accounting, are in the historicals, are in accounting. And in order to apply AI to the finance accounting suite in sort of a force multiplier way, you need to understand all of the building blocks, right? And understand how everything fits together, so that then you can apply AI in ways that other people are not thinking about it. So I think do the against the grain thing and study accounting.
Well, Michael, I think that's great advice for the future leaders. And I know you're really busy, so I want to take a moment to thank you for your time. And also, I'd just like to give you the final word.
Absolutely. We've talked a lot about sort of being outside your comfort zone, trying new things, being comfortable failing. And I think that's increasingly important and true in today's day and age with AI and how disruptive that is. So be true to yourself and be comfortable outside your comfort zone, and really explore just growth and learning as your overall professional story arc. And I think you will all be incredibly successful as professionals overall. So I'll just leave you with that thought, which is grow and learn and be comfortable failing.
That wraps up this episode of The Secrets of Rockstar CFOs. A huge thank you to our sponsors, Plantful and Travel Bank. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review at rockstarcfos.com. Until next time, rock on.
Thank you for listening to this episode. To continue your exploration of this role that focuses on strategy, leadership, finance, and technology, listen to more episodes of the show at rockstarcfos.com. Join this revolution, episode by episode. Push yourself to achieve great things and unlock the best opportunities available to you. CFOs are creating a legacy. and it's time for you to leave your own unique imprint on the world today. That's all for now. See you on the next one.